Hello, Mitch. It has been a very busy week here at the legislature this week because we're just starting to see budget options being placed on the table for what the final budget bill, at least in the House of Representatives, could look like. I am following tonight the House Appropriation Committee's Subcommittee on Education. Now, they're recommending spending for state public schools, community colleges, and the university system. The simple equation is you include all the cuts to all three systems will equal 10.5% or $1.25 billion. To break it down, we begin with the K through 12 public school funding. System-wide, they would see 8.8% cuts in the public schools. The community college system would be cut 10%, with the University of North Carolina system experiencing a 15.5% cut. Those public K through 12 budget proposals will preserve every public school teacher job, say the Republicans, but it will fund only teacher assistant jobs for kindergarten and first grade statewide. The option is schools could use local money or shift funds to preserve teacher assistant jobs at higher grade levels. Learn and Earn Online would be completely defunded under the proposal set forth by the chair members of this subcommittee. Teachers would see a performance pay program launched. Local school districts would receive 10% cuts to their administration funding. These local school boards would not be allowed to reduce classroom funding to preserve their administration funding. The House Appropriations Subcommittee on Education is also recommending $110 million in community college system cuts, but the college system's enrollment growth would be fully funded under this initial proposal. Community college students, you would pay $10 per credit hour next budget year. The system would receive $44 million of flexibility to cut spending primarily on its terms. The proposal would end any state financial support that's being given for community college athletic programs. At the university system level, the University of North Carolina system would see over $400 million in budget cuts under the Education Subcommittee budget recommendations. University enrollment growth, once again, the Republicans say they are fully funding this. The system would receive flexibility to cut some $469 million, but lawmakers have carved out what are called special provisions. One is for the UNC hospitals, the other is for UNC-TV. The subcommittee proposes ending the UNC hospitals' $44 million annual state subsidy and eliminating it immediately with the next fiscal year. UNC-TV would lose its guaranteed state funding. The subcommittee proposes a $1 million cut for the public broadcaster in 2011 and 2012, with no funding in place yet, at least state funding, for 2012-2013. The UNC Board of Governors would be directed to craft a plan to operate UNC-TV with zero state funding by the year 2014. As a matter of full disclosure, you are watching UNC-TV right now. UNC-TV currently receives 45% of its state funding from the North Carolina General Assembly. Not all is cut at the university system level. East Carolina's dental school gets a boost in the budget recommendations. The Education Subcommittee also recommends that $18 million be used to increase and support the university system's building reserve funds. Stokes County Representative Brian Holloway is with us. He helped write this subcommittee, budget options and recommendations. You pick 15% for the university, you go down to 8.8% for the public schools. Why the staggered amount of cuts? What did it achieve with it?
Well, I think the first thing that we have to take a look at is our university system is without question one of the best in the nation. When you start looking at where we compare nationwide with K through 12, we're mid-40s at best. And we have a goal to try to get K through 12 to be one of the best in the nation as well. And can you put the brunt of the cuts on an area and achieve that? And I think the answer to that is no. So that's why our number one priority was to protect the classroom, and the essential piece to protecting the classroom is protecting the teacher allotments, which we fully did fund the teacher allotments. Certainly superintendents have discretion. They may let some teaching position go, but the funds are there to fully fund all the teachers if they so choose.
I'm sure you'll read more about the teaching assistant jobs at grades 2 and up.
Right.
No more state funding for those positions, if I understand your proposal correctly.
We funded K through 1, but we are allowing the flexibility for superintendents to have second and third grade teachers if they so choose. They can use funds from other allotments if they choose to do that and roll that into that. I can say that that was a difficult decision for us to make. Certainly we did not want to cut those. It was nothing that we enjoyed. It was just a matter of dollars and cents. And some school systems seem to already be phasing out third grade, and some have even started phasing out second grade. So it's kind of a trend that had already started before we got here. But certainly we wish we had the money to fully fund that, and we went as far as we could, but allowed the flexibility for them to go further if they need.
Now, you're asking the local school districts to take care of the buses you have for school buses, use the same textbooks, or don't add to the textbook load. Is that correct?
Now, the school buses, that's not exactly correct.
Okay,
We made a small cut in the school bus allotment, but according to staff, that we fully funded the school buses to the point that they can replace the buses that have 200,000 miles, et cetera. In the governor's budget, now she took the state out of the school bus business. We chose not to do that, and we were trying to improve upon her budget by not shifting burden to the local counties. We kept workman's comp and tort liability at the state level as well, in addition to the school buses. So we have, I feel, done a very good job of not passing the burden off to someone else.
When you looked at the community college system, $10 per credit hour, why was that the sweet spot for setting tuition rates?
Well, we just had a discussion with those folks in the community colleges. We, told them we're probably going to cut you 10%. Tell us what you would want, and so we just basically took their recommendations. They give, in my opinion, great bang for your buck, and $10 I think is an amount that's students can probably comfortably handle. I think a lot of folks at the community college, they're probably not extremely wealthy, so we want to keep things within reason. And the community colleges, we just basically signed off on what they asked and told them to give us your 10% reduction options, and we gave them what they asked for.
And then even though you're cutting in places, I understand that you will fund the expected enrollment growth for the next year.
That's my understanding.
Now, at the university level, 15.5% cuts. Why do you think the UNC system can absorb 15.5%?
Well, first off, you've got to roll in that 15.5% is only of state funds.
Right.
And they have a considerable amount of money that comes in with federal dollars. Now, I realize there are some strings attached to those federal dollars, but when you roll that 15% into all their allotments, it becomes a single-digit cut. In addition, they have private fundraising capabilities where K-12 and community colleges don't. And you get back to that same point. We have one of the best in the nation. These are very talented individuals, I think, that can manage through this crisis, and we can maintain that elite status that we have. But we've got to do something for K-12, and it just became a matter of where do you give the money to, and that's why in the House we did favor K-12 and held them under 10%, actually 8.8%.
What does this mean for tuition at any of the universities?
Well, the UNC system actually has flexibility. They can do whatever they so choose with tuition as long as the Board of Governors will sign off on it. And so, they may, I think that they just recently passed a tuition increase. They could come up with more, who knows what they'll do, but they do have the flexibility, and we'll just have to see what they do, I guess.
You had a couple of special provisions. Number one was the UNC hospitals. It's a $44 million state subsidy that's been given to them historically.
Right.
You propose eliminating that entire amount beginning July 1st. Why did you decide to make that cut there?
We saw that as just revenue that we could potentially grab that would have not a tremendous amount of impact, because we were trying, as I said, to save the teaching positions, and that's a hefty, hefty price tag that carries. So we were trying to take funds and pockets of money that had high dollar marks that could be used to save those positions. That was $44 million, and that was what we identified as low-hanging fruit.
All right, UNC-TV, you're on UNC-TV.
Right.
We're all adults here.
Right.
You propose giving us $1 million cut, our network, not me, next year, possibly zero in 2012. But once again, we're a provision that says we want to move towards the end of a state subsidy.
Right.
What brought that to the table to say that's appropriate and to write a special provision for that?
Right. Well, I think it was a matter, again, of looking to find dollars and cents. I guess there's a hope there that it could be financed, privately. Certainly, I don't think anyone in that room was against UNC-TV, and I'm sure all the folks love seeing their faces on TV from week to week. And so I think that was just, again, it was just an area that we saw that we could take funds to save positions. That was our number one priority, again, was protecting the classroom at K-12, and we were just trying to, find the funds that we could find to try to make that happen.
So put it all together into one big package. You're
That's
going to
right.
present this to your constituents, taxpayers throughout North Carolina. What should North Carolinians think about your education proposals?
Well, they need to first keep in mind that we have a very difficult economic climate. But even through that economic climate, we did protect the classroom. We fully funded all the teacher allotments. We did not shift any burdens to the counties that they couldn't handle. Actually, we didn't shift any that I can identify in the education budget. And I think that overall, I think that we treated the university and community college and K-12 with a lot of respect. And I think that we can weather this storm. And I think that we can turn this thing around, and we can have the best education system, community college, university, and K-12 in the nation if we'll just set that to be our goal. And
Thank you, Representative Holloway. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
The budget items we are discussing are the recommendations that could be made to the larger House Appropriations Committee. That large group will craft the House version of a state budget proposal. The state Senate's working on its own plans. The subcommittee chairman of that House Committee on Education say they'll be considering amendments from fellow subcommittee members beginning next week. Representative Rick Glazier is a member of the Education Subcommittee that's part of the Appropriations Committee. Long title, big job, Representative Glazier. What do you make of what was released to you this week?
Well, given the targets that the subcommittee had to use, I think that's the beginning problem. But I don't think there's any question that the best way that I can sum up the education budget is horrifically destructive and breathtakingly massive in its cuts.
Even if your opinion is destructive and it's massive, is it necessary given the amount of money the state is pulling in for tax revenue?
Well, that's the classic case where the question you ask sort of gives you the answer that you're designed to.
Didn't try to do that.
There is a 1-cent sales tax that we put on the last 2 years in order to try to balance the cuts with revenue and make it a responsible approach to governing. The majority right now has chosen to not want to discuss any revenue, including continuing that 1-cent sales tax that the vast majority of the public thinks is fine, because the trade-off is clear in their budget proposal. The trade-off is thousands and thousands of state employees. It's 8,000 teacher assistants. It's thousands of faculty members. It's 10,000 classes at UNC. It is cuts galore to all of the categories of public education, 21% of assistant principals, 15% of non-instructional personnel. There are so many folks who are going to lose jobs under this proposal, and the damage will be so destructive to K-12 and to the university system particularly, that it would take a generation to really recover the quality that we want to have. And are people really saying that they're unwilling to keep the 1-cent sales tax and have that as the alternative? And I don't think that's at all what the public believes.
Well, I would think the Republicans ran on a mandate of reducing government, right-sizing, and they say this is, if you ask them, it's going to say this is that term right-sizing. We're getting government where it needs to be.
Well, government, politics is about the getting elected, but governing is a different story. And sometimes you run on positions where you believe in them at the time, but then you come to know what the facts are. And nothing is in governing generally any longer black and white. You govern with nuances and with flexibility and adaptability. The goal ought not be just what we promised ex-voter. It ought to be what we really promised ex-voters in the state is to do our absolute best to move this state forward. And sometimes both sides have to give, and sometimes both sides have to learn about what that is. I don't think the destructive nature of this budget is at all what the voters expected or voted for. Downsizing and finding efficiencies is critical, and we've been doing that actually the last couple of years. And there are some things in here that do that. But the depth of the cuts, the kinds of things that would happen are way beyond efficiencies. These are into the absolutely core of the quality of what we call public education in this state. And this is not a budget upon which this state can move forward or progress.
Let's dive into the numbers. The public school K-12 funding would be an 8.8% budget cut, and it's
about $700 million.
That's the least of the community college and university system cuts as part of the package. What do you make of the idea of cutting 8.8%? But you keep every teacher in the job. You do eliminate teachers' assistants from second grade up, at least using state money to pay for them.
Except that you're not at all keeping every teacher in the job. That's just not a proposition that meets the facts. You've already got built into the budget for K-12 $300 million in discretionary cuts that were in place. The systems, in order to continue to meet that, because it's continuing, have to cut positions, and a lot of that is classroom because they have nowhere else to go. Now the new majority is adding $42 million in discretionary cuts this year, $100 million next year, at the same time that their line item cutting dramatically all of the other places that you could possibly take money, pretty much eliminating textbooks, massively cutting into supply money, cutting into assistant principals, non-instructional personnel. There is nowhere left to cut. The districts are going to have to cut teachers. Now they may, because of the budget provision, have to cut their locally paid teachers in order to sort of switch it out with state positions. But anybody who looks at this budget and tells you that teachers' jobs are saved is simply fooling the public.
Are you saying that's a purposeful misleading of the public? Everyone, Representative Holloway says we have funded every teacher's job.
I think that it is, and I think that there's a wish to believe that, the same way that the last 2 years we funded every state position teacher, but we were clear, we weren't funding every teacher. We didn't save every teacher's job. We saved every state teacher's job the second year that wasn't cut that first year, and we weren't talking about the local cuts that are going on. And so if the majority's position is that we have not specifically cut any new state teachers, that's one thing. To say that in fact this budget doesn't cut state teachers is simply not true.
Community colleges, enrollment funding, they're saying 100% they are going to maintain that, but a 10% cut overall, and will increase tuition to $10 per credit hour.
Yeah, you're reducing access, obviously, at the same time that there's a $30 million cut to financial aid, or $37 million, I think, in this budget. And you're requiring a $45 million cut or so to the college. So you giveth with one hand, you taketh away with the other. And so, yeah, they're funding enrollment growth, but they're also cutting everything that comes in enrollment growth with a direct budget cut. So community college not gaining anything, plus having some pretty big line item cuts down the line on other categories of funding. Although I think that given the three systems, community colleges comes out a little bit better than the other two, despite the percentage.
Let's go to UNC system, 15.5% cuts. Representative Holloway says, to preserve the classroom, the universities need to take the disproportionate share, I guess the heavier of the burden of cuts. They get federal money, private money, they raise money, have tuition.
Yeah, well, I think, again, you've got to put things in context, remembering there were hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts to the universities the last couple of years that they took because we require them to, and that they took on management efficiency studies that Erskine Bowles started. There's no question at all that what they've done with this $500 million cut to the universities, let's put it in perspective, that's equal to the budget, the whole budget of 5 universities in the system. They have cut an amount that would close 5 of the 16 campuses in the system. Nobody can look at that and say that's not directly affecting quality. Our projection is that it would close 10,000 sections of classes, about 4,000 faculty members and assorted instructional people cut. From the university that's the best in the country and is the one sort of driving economic force in the state, I think this is more disastrous to them than perhaps any other aspect of the education budget.
Next week, I understand you could offer amendments to these budget options.
Intend to.
We will be following that very closely. Hope you'll be back to share your insight as this process takes shape and final form.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.
You take care.
In the coming weeks, a final House budget plan will be released. The state Senate will get a say in changing certain provisions of the budget bill as part of the reconciliation process. Any budget bill that becomes law must earn Governor Bev Perdue's signature. She does have veto power over state budget bills, and she has already released her budget spending proposals several weeks ago. Josh Ellis with the North Carolina News Network. We're sitting in the Education Subcommittee meeting this week. Josh, what pops out at you regarding the initial round of education spending?
Well, very different approaches in terms of how they're dealing with various sections of the education budget. You look at the K-12 budget, all the public schools, very specific cuts on what they want to see reductions in. The biggest hit there are things like teaching assistants and other non-instructional support. So the committee chairs have said they want to protect the classroom, and they have, for the most part, protected the teachers, but the other folks that are supporting those teachers do take a pretty big hit. a lot of other pet programs that have, for example, dropout prevention grants, something that former Speaker Hackney always made a big initiative, and things like that are seeing some big cuts. Whereas you look at the UNC system, where for the most part, other than a few cuts to particular programs, they're given the flexibility to make those cuts. And they do take a much bigger chunk, about 15% from the universities compared to about 9% for public schools. And so, very different approach to how this manages, but still some serious education cuts.
Yeah, going back to the K through 12 funding, the classroom teachers funding, how does that, with the teachers' assistants from second grade up being eliminated, how does that mesh with what Governor Perdue has said she would like to see in a budget?
Well, Governor certainly wants to keep those positions. It's hard to do, though. She doesn't necessarily. Her budget did include some cuts to those teacher assistants, not as far, and it also didn't eliminate them in certain grades. The teachers have said, look, especially in these grades, it's very important for us to have some extra help in making sure that kids don't get far behind. But the Republicans said, look, this is the matter of what we're dealing with. We've got a tough budget situation, and those are the areas that are going to have to go.
What is able to be achieved when this subcommittee recommends 8.8% for public schools, 10% for community college, 15.5% for the UNC? The big picture of this is what comes out of this with those staggered amounts.
Well, certainly this is the very first lap in the marathon. So these numbers, traditionally we've seen the House been more supportive of public schools, and the Senate's been more supportive of the university system. So I wouldn't expect that that trend to stop this year, although we do have a different dynamic with Republicans now in charge. I do think the university system is going to take a bigger hit than they've seen in recent years, primarily because the Republican budget writers are saying that not only are they getting state money, they're getting federal money and other private donations, and so they're better able to, in their words, they're better able to manage those cuts and kind of soften the blow there.
House Speaker Tom Tillis has openly said, I'm working very closely with Senate budget writers to come out with a bill that maybe they'll have it reconciled faster in the calendar year. Even if secondarily, at this stage of budget recommendations, how involved would the Senate be, even if it's in the background?
Well, they're involved. I mean, they're certainly aware of a lot's going on. Traditionally, when we've seen a House budget or whatever chamber went first, we would see the House budget, and then the Senate would do their version, and then they'd work out the differences. I think you're going to see maybe them 90%, 85% on the same page, so that when it actually hits the floor and starts moving on the House, it's really going to be a lot faster process than we've seen in recent years.
The Education Subcommittee chairmen say they will allow amendments to be offered beginning next week, probably a vote coming next week as well on these budget recommendations. Is there a serious chance amendments will be adopted, or do these budget discussions tend to be locked in? You get a public hearing, vote down the amendments, vote on the proposals?
It really depends on what those amendments do. If you're talking about putting more money in a program that draws your bottom line number for each subcategory out of whack, then that's going to be tough to pass. You're going to have to probably come up with some other ways to offset that change. If you're talking about something that maybe procedurally moves stuff around, or more of a minute detail relative to the actual money, that kind of stuff could probably go through. But it's going to be hard to come in there and say I want a whole lot more money when there's not a lot of money to go around.
Well, Josh, we'll be doing this dance for weeks and weeks. Hope to have you back on real soon.
Sounds good.